Kia ora there, Phil. Russ, how are you going there?
I'm good.
All right, it is 9:30, so we will get started. Welcome to everyone in the room and everyone online as well to our first Monday meeting of Regional Connections. Very nice, actually, not to be left to the last day of the week. So yeah, welcome to everyone. We've got quite a meaty agenda today. So yeah, really keen to hear everyone's thoughts and yeah, acknowledge that people have done their reading and done their homework. So for the most part, we'll be taking reports as read. Right. Do we have any apologies, Dave?
We certainly do. Hugh Vercoe will be absent briefly during the meeting, and councillors Fox, Wilson and Webber are absent today.
Thank you. Right. Okay, thank you, Jessica and Councillor Liz. Very good. Fantastic. All right, I'm happy to move that. Chair Remington, would you like to second? Thank you. All those in favour? Against? Carried. All right, confirmation of the agenda. I'm happy to move. Councillor McPherson, are you happy to second? Thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. All right. Are there any disclosures of interest that we're not aware of? Nope. Very good. We'll just move on past that one. Any members of the public? Not today. Very good. Confirmation of the minutes from September. All right. I'm happy to move. Deputy Mayor Liz, would you like to second or have you got a question? Thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Fantastic. All right. Well, there's been some exciting things in the public transport space recently. Most significantly would be the half-price fares, which came into effect on Friday. And yeah, it'll be fantastic to see the 3 months of those and how that plays out with people's travel choices. So yeah, looking forward to some anecdotal evidence about yeah, what a difference affordability and price might play in fares. Yeah, fantastic. Right, we've got our first item, which is the DHB travel plan update, and we have got Greg online, and he will be taking us through that. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Angela, and good morning, committee members. Hopefully you can hear me and that's working okay. Let me know, please, if you can't. And I'll just share my screen. Hopefully that should be coming through now for you. Can everyone see that presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Firstly, thank you for accommodating this agenda item a little earlier because I have a community health forum facilitation commitment later this morning. The first thing I want to say is this is an update on a presentation we provided to you earlier last year on our travel and access plan. And the other thing I want to note for you all is some of you will be aware of this, but the district health boards, including Waikato, will cease to exist from the 1st of July. So they're being replaced by two key entities, Health New Zealand and the Māori Health Authority. So the transitions are tended to be really smooth and will happen over a couple of years. We're fortunate we've got a couple of local representatives. We've got Dame Karen Patasi, who's our current DHB Commissioner, who will be a board member of Health New Zealand, and Rihanna Manuel, who is the CEO of Haraki Primary Healthcare Organisation, is the new Chief Executive for the interim Māori Health Authority. So that's really good. We've got some local voice in the new system. The system includes localities, which are intended to be, they're a term being used for planning purposes. At the moment, a lot of planning is done quite nationally, with a little bit done at a district level by district health boards and some done at a regional level. So the intention is to identify needs much more by locality area or local community and identify priorities for that, and much greater focus on well-being. And the reason I mention that is that things like water, transport, education, income have direct and indirect impacts on our health outcomes. So that change in focus, I think, will be quite helpful for communities, and it will enable them to work with other sectors and groups on those things as much as on health. I'm keen to provide a brief update for your councils, should you want that, on this change. Please let me know, or to committees within your councils. Our Chief Executive, Kevin Snee's, really keen, and our Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, Margaret Wilson, to engage with you on these changes as we see some possibilities for joint work in future, particularly with local government change being talked about and some of the changes that are already facing you in local government. Anyway, that's my introduction. Just in terms of the DHB travel and access plan, we've also got a sustainability commitment, which I'm showing on the slide, and transport's identified as one of our key focuses for the sustainability commitment. About 14% of our emissions are travel or fuel based within our organisation. So it's quite a good focus area to have in terms of looking at how we can improve and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. I may have mentioned this earlier, so please apologise if I have, but in terms of transport investment, we have travel support that we provide for people. That's either transport or accommodation, and in total that equates for about $1 million per annum, and almost half of that is transport related. So on top of that, we provide about 300 odd K to community health transport providers who run shuttles or car-based community transport services for those who have no other option. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. This slide has the key results of the travel plan project, which we undertook with Regional Council and Hamilton City about 18 months ago. We had a really good number of responses to our survey, about 1,600 people, and that included both staff and visitors or health consumers who come to the hospital. It had a particular focus on travel to and from the hospital site in Hamilton because we have some big travel, parking and other related issues related to that site. So we also had a particular focus on Māori Pacific and those who travel with a disability, and about 18% of respondents live with a disability, and 32% also said they were rural, and about 11% said they were Māori. So not surprisingly, we've got a really high use of cars, people who travel in their own car to and from the site, about 62% for consumers and visitors, and about 70% for our staff. And bus use is really low. It was around 4% for consumers and about 5% for staff. Community transport was really, relatively high, but around 11%. And cycling was higher than expected at around 7 or 8%. We also found that 40% of all consumers who travel find the experience quite stressful, and to be honest, I'm not surprised. A lot of that is linked to our parking building, which is very difficult and challenging to navigate because of its design. So the other thing we did was an environmental stock take. So you can see on the screen some photos of walkways around the hospital site and signage, tactile pavers for those who have a disability. So there were a lot of recommendations came through in terms of improvements that we can make to that, as well as cycle storage and bus improvements as well. All right, I'll move on to the next slide. This is a map of our campus. Why I've put this up today is to show you visually what we're talking about at the Waikato Hospital site. We've got a couple of car park buildings, including the Hague Road car park, which is in the middle of the site, and the Pembroke car park, which is adjacent to where our bus stops are at the moment. They're marked in purple there outside our emergency department. We've got some quite key constraints with this site because it's quite a small site for the size of our hospital and campus and the work and activity that happens in clinics that occur on site. We've been working alongside the City Council and Regional Council on some improvements and options to improve bus services and physical infrastructure for buses, as well as make crossing safer along Pembroke Street and Ohaupo Road, but also looking at shared paths for those who are wheel pedestrians or cycling or walking along Ohaupo Road. So that work's been really good to be involved in, and hopefully we'll see a preferred option being identified shortly for that and it being put forward for investment. I'll just scroll to the last slide. This provides an update on the actual plan, the Travel and Access Plan. It was adopted by our commissioners in February this year, and we've already started on some improvements related to it, which you can see up there on the screen, some examples. We've also put in place some cycle storage for the public, some bike stands outside ED and within the site as well, the hospital site. We plan to launch a web page which will promote travel options, and we're doing that in conjunction, some of it in conjunction with Hamilton City, because they do something similar for their staff particularly. So we want to promote that for our staff because there's huge opportunities for us to shift travel behaviour for staff who live in quite close proximity to the hospital site. The other thing we want to do is implement a public transport fare concession. So we have budget to do that. We haven't yet done that, largely because of COVID. However, with the government's recent announcement, which was mentioned earlier by the chair, we're now looking at system feasibility of whether or not we can perhaps reduce the 50% concession that the government's implemented further to be a 25% concession, whether that would be doable, because both offerings are slightly different. The government offering is for all services and all stops across the region, whereas but the DHB's one is specifically targeting the bus stops that are at the hospital. So it may not work to have them work in tandem, but we're looking at that at the moment, and Trudy and Andy at Regional Council are doing some work on that currently. Really keen to look at this because 1 in 4 staff said they'd be willing to travel by bus if it was convenient and easy. So we know that there are plans to increase the frequency of the bus services, of the Comet bus, for example, which services the hospital site. So really keen to encourage staff and make it as easy as possible for them to look at taking a bus, even if it's 1 or 2 days a week and it's not every day of the week. So yeah, I think that's probably enough from me. Happy to take any questions or comments in terms of the presentation, and just reiterating, really keen to come and talk to you about the work that sits behind the Travel and Access Plan with your council, but also more broadly around some of the changes that are coming in the very near future for the health system and opportunities that might be there for working alongside your councils.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, there's some exciting things happening there. Yeah, I've got a question, but I'll wait to the end. I think first up we have Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Morena, Greg, always good to see you. Great to see this work progressing. So I had a slightly tongue-in-cheek question, but I'll withhold it in terms of our own staff travel plan at Hamilton City Council. But what I would like to ask you about is whether you would be in a position to submit to the annual plan for Hamilton City Council, because I'm hearing that the Comet route is an important part of this, and we have the opportunity to make some critical improvements to that route, including crossings on Te Rapa Road, Ulster Street, Pembroke Street, and currently the funding for that has been pushed out a year and is subject to Waka Kotahi co-funding, which means that it just may not happen, at least, or be significantly deferred. So some input from the community and from the DHB in terms of the significance of some of those improvements could be helpful if you felt that that was an important part of this kaupapa.
Kia ora, thanks, Sarah. We definitely would look at that, I think, but I'd need to check with our Waikato Public Health team who manage our submissions on behalf of the DHB. But I think that we'd be open to looking at that, so I'll have a chat with them.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Next up, I have a little bit tricky because we've got people in the room and people online. That's all right. Let's go with Councillor McPherson, then Councillor Tegg, then Chair Remington.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for your report. Good keeping up to date with what's going on there, our biggest single employer in the city. Look, Greg, when you mentioned some of the issues that have sort of led to the review, one that you didn't mention, though I know we've talked about in the past, I'm just wondering how much of a driver that is the parking congestion around the vicinity of the hospital in Hamilton West and Melville suburbs, because as a city councillor we frequently get complaints, some of them quite sustained, about it appears to be mostly staff parking but with some patient parking as well in those areas, and in a couple of streets cases a push for us to have a residents only thing, which would really work against people associated with the hospital. So I'm just wondering how much of an issue you/the hospital see that as from your end. Yeah,
thanks, Councillor McPherson. We're really aware of that issue. Through the work we did prior to the plan development, Robin raised it on behalf of the city. So we know, as I said, there is definitely issues on site, but also around the site as well. So another reason why we need to make other options as easy as we can, particularly for staff, I think, who often live in that proximity area to the hospital as well.
Okay. Thanks. Another question, Madam Chair. The concession, just looking at your one alone, forgetting the government one, if that's only for stops or access at hospital sort of associated bus stops, what about people that might, say, come into the CBD from somewhere in the city that's not on a direct route to the hospital, hop off and tag on within a few minutes into the a bus that is going to the hospital? Would they not qualify then for the first part of their journey or the last part on their return under your scheme?
They definitely would. Apologies, I forgot to mention that. So if you're within a half-hour transfer window from any service between services, as long as you are within that half hour, you would be eligible no matter where you're travelling from.
Oh, that's very good to hear. Sorry, the last thing, I suppose, after 1st of July, will we still, and the DHB itself not being in existence, how will we be relating to, say, people like you on this subject? Will we still have a Greg Morton that attends our meetings and gives these reports, or is it somehow through Wellington? Is there still that local relationship?
There most definitely will still be that local relationship. The local governance will change. That won't be in place from the 1st of July, but there'll definitely be local key contact people, including myself in terms of transport. So that will continue.
And if we need to have investment in, say, a shared changing of Pembroke Street for bus stops and that, does that have to get then signed off by Wellington, or is there some local mechanism for things up to a certain level or whatever?
I think that detail's still being worked through, Councillor McPherson, but I think there will definitely be a local or district kind of mechanism and then a regional one, because the approach is that there'll be 4 regions across New Zealand and then local areas within that or districts within that. So I think the operational side of it's still being worked through, and we don't have information on that yet as yet either, a lot of that detail. But yeah, I think our commissioner has been really clear, and that based upon what she knows and has seen, the intention is to make sure there's strong local voice still within the new system.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Tegg.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and hi, Greg. Thanks for your work, and a special thanks to you for facilitating and coming over to a couple of transport-related meetings in Thames last year. And that's really the subject of my question, and really follows on from Sarah's. So another request for you to consider making a submission on our annual plan, which incorporates proposals for greater connectivity, particularly into Thames from Coromandel, eastern Coromandel towns and Hauraki into Thames, in particular the Thames Hospital. And the other part of that, of course, is the rating issue. And as you know from your visit to Thames, although we had some discussion around these sort of things, they didn't actually anything concrete come out of them. So this is an opportunity for sort of the community input from your organisation to, to have a say on that. The other part of the proposal is at least some form of connection from the Coromandel through to Hamilton via Yarraha, which would enable people to get to the Hamilton Hospital. So that's sort of the first part of my question. The second is whether there's any possibility of sort of any synergy between the funding you have and what regional council might provide for connections to your hospitals in Thames and Hamilton. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Tegg. In regards to your first question, was really happy to be part of that discussion, and while I'm aware, like you, that we didn't result in an outcome, still really keen to continue that discussion, because I think it does involve multiple parties, possibly including Waka Kotahi, so really keen to continue that. It also aligns really well with some health developments that are happening in Hauraki and Thames Coromandel, because the locality I mentioned earlier, localities, this new term, a new proposed locality is being prototyped in Hauraki and Thames Coromandel, and Te Koha Health are part of that. And what it proposes is a hub that's Thames-based and located around the hospital site, and then smaller hubs geographically dispersed around the peninsula and Hauraki. So it's still in very early stages. It's been put forward to the authorities, to Health New Zealand and Māori Health Authority, for acceptance as a prototype. So I think the more that we can make connections and access easier, physical access easier, along with looking at remote access options that work for that community, those communities, the better in terms of the new health system. So in terms of the annual plan, draft annual plan request, again, as I said to Hamilton City, we'll take that request through to Waikato Public Health and discuss that with them, because I think, yeah, it's another good opportunity for us to raise community voice on access to health.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Tegg. Chair Remington.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Greg, and nice to have you share the travel and access plan with us. And it's just probably concerning that the abolishing the health boards. I just look at the difference of when the health boards were established, and certainly the relationship that councils enjoyed for the first time, and questions that could be asked, particularly in regard to access and public transport, improved enormously with Dave and with Martin Gallagher and board members. So let's hope that with the centralisation that we don't fall into the arm's length and lack of kind of immediate communication, advocates for public transport right here in the Waikato. Question, I've got a couple of questions. Having lived in Lake Crescent for over 30 years, I just have seen over those years car parks being taken away, bluntly, eroded, and they were often the staff. There seemed to be a deliberate policy to eradicate and reduce and eliminate car parks in and around the hospital. Given that the hospital is growing, given that the multi-million-dollar machines, etc., aren't going to be in Thames Hospital, they're going to be in the Waikato Hospital, and the limited opportunity now to probably increase car park buildings, they have to go up, if anything, on the campus. What is the board's kind of policy in regard to this reducing eliminated curbside parking in and around the Waikato Hospital campus? That's the first question.
Thank you, Councillor Vercoe. This relates to an earlier question. I think it's a conversation with Hamilton City Council, who are responsible for that parking. Obviously, there have been some new, I think, national central government initiatives related to on-street parking that have been introduced in the last 12 months that may have a link to this as well. But we really want to make options available other than bringing your own car to work if you're a staff member, but options also for health consumers who need to come in, or visitors to the hospital. You're right, the hospital will take on a key role for the region, as it does at the moment, because of the nature of the type of hospital it is and the services that can only be provided at Waikato. So that will continue into the future.
Good response. I personally believe that there should be free public transport for all persons with, whether it be a gold card, community card. We certainly were the first in this country with disabled persons. That should be rolled out, I think, a lot wider. And let's hope that after this half price concept, which is a very good one by the government, particularly after the 2 years of COVID, it seems to be very well welcomed in the press. Let's hope it proves to be so as well with people's actions. But the point I would like to make, and I'm sure that you know it as well as I, Greg, what helps the smaller towns not kind of losing the older persons is good access to public health. And I know my colleague Dave McPherson and I were, persons, if there's not good timetabling, to have the person having to stay overnight in a motel is expensive. And, it's up to, say, $80 to $100, maybe $120. And so we've got to continue to ensure and accommodate and be mindful that persons living in the rural areas need good access to public health. Otherwise, you're just going to see the smaller towns depopulating and those persons moving into the city of Hamilton or the larger centres, which I think is not a tragedy, but it's a jolly shame as these smaller towns kind of lose their key and their more elderly persons. So keep that in mind. Remember, this Waikato Regional Council plus your local district councils, I think they've had a huge mind shift in regard to public transport, and the Comet demonstrates that. I mean, we could hardly even get the orbiter into the Waikato Hospital campus only a few years ago, and luckily we've kind of moved away from that. So let's hope a commissioner is going to be as forward-thinking as the health board and the members that have served on it. So that's a comment, but I needed to make it. Thanks very much, Greg.
Thank you, Chair Russ. Deputy Mayor Liz.
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, I'm just going to focus a little bit on the staffing. As a large employer, I'd just like to congratulate the DHB on this initiative because, I see across even our region of Waipa, industrial nodes are growing like crazy. So this offers a real blueprint, I think, for other large organisations to perhaps, offer or look at, what's worked, what hasn't worked, some tips and things that perhaps the DHB might share later on with other larger employers around the region. So, yeah, congratulations, DHB. I think you're leaders in this field and look forward to seeing what the actual results will be later on too.
Thank you.
Mayor Toby.
Do I just talk, or is it just
You might want to bring it a little bit closer.
come green on its own, does it, or does it just stay red?
It's red
Oh,
means
it's red.
go.
Yeah, thanks. And Dennis, Councillor Dennis Tegg, thank you for your passion trying to link TCDC and HDC in this study, because quite contrary to Chairman Russ's comments, the regions are growing. We've got about 700 new elderly people moving into a retirement village because that's where they want to be. And you're right, it's going to be an issue a bit later on. They're trying to access, so having that connector between the peninsula and the city, right, and even into Thames Hospital, because surely a lot of it can be done there. It's really, really good. Yeah, keep it.
Awesome, thank you. Right, I'll just finish off with a few comments. Greg, we really appreciate our partnership with you, and we've seen that really grow this training. Love the links that we have in with your community transport, and also your DHB bus that you pop on from Taumarunui up as well. Yeah, really keen to see other people jump on board that one as well. I just have just wondering, your patient letters that you send out mention parking first and then bus second. Have we had any success in, increasing the spotlight on the Orbiter route and the Comet route? Knowing that when I talk to people, I often say, hey, if I've got a hospital appointment, I'll park along the Comet route, or I'll park along the Orbiter route, anywhere, and jump on those buses, because it's a lot less stressful than trying to navigate your parking building. And we end up possibly having unofficial park and rides sort of pop up here and there. But yeah, just Greg, have we had any success with that hierarchy in those communications?
Yeah, I've had several conversations, thank you, Chair, around that issue, and I'm hoping we are making progress on it. Unfortunately, the communications are very styled for a technical medical specialist type audience and not a patient, which doesn't help. So there's a lot of information in there that I don't believe I as a consumer need, and the transport link is very weak at the moment, so we want to strengthen that, and I think we can do that through the letters, yes, but we can also do that by making sure our website is very clear that there are other options that make it easy to do, as you say, to jump on the Comet along its route without necessarily having to come right in to the hospital in your own car. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor McPherson, you have spoken once, and we do have a large agenda. Have you got very quickly? I'll allow you one more. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not going to do a Russ and give a speech, but one of the issues for staff at the hospital, Greg, is the rosters, and they're not suited necessarily the normal bus timetables. I just wonder, is the concessions available on the new flexi or flex buses, and is that going to be a major part of your push with staff going forward once the sort of session period's over and you get things going? Because I see that one of the things we talked about with flex was that it would be really useful potentially for people that worked unusual hours in major places, and we use the hospital as an example. So I just wonder how that link's is planned to be used by you guys and our operations staff here.
Thanks, Councillor McPherson. Absolutely, this would be my answer to that question. I think the flex service is still in its initial phase at the moment, but we're really keen to pick up conversations with regional councils on the next phases, because I, like you, see that as a huge opportunity. The plan also includes an action to continue conversation with regional council on the possibility of shifting the schedule for buses that service the hospital, because at the moment it's about half an hour or an hour out of sync with shift changes. So that could be something too that we could look at. But the flex service, I agree, depending on where it heads next in terms of the next phase of its development, we'd be really keen to be part of a discussion on that.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson, for raising that, and I'm sure our staff will work in with DHB to see what we can come up with on that. All right, as there are no more questions or comments, do we have a mover to receive the report? Thank you, Chair Russ, and seconder. Thank you, Mayor Toby. All those in favour? Given the size of the agenda, I think we've had enough discussion on the topic.
Sorry, even under your standing orders, I think the members something, questions, yeah, and then that's more, can't just go for questions to voting.
Yeah, the motion is to receive a report. Would you like a third attempt, Councillor McPherson?
The only motion is to receive it. But you don't want to receive it.
Something to do with that, even on your council, I'm sure you can't do this.
No, we do it a little bit different, depends how you want to do. If you go by the book, you can kind of make it to yourself, but technically you shouldn't even receive the report. No one asks
That's not the
questions.
case at all. You look at the law, standing orders provided by local government. It's not you to speak, at least the council.
Yeah, general practice here at Regional Council is if there were to be further speakers, then it would be the mover and the seconder. Dave,
Sorry,
Dave, do you have any
asked
more
a question,
advice?
Madam Chair, you asked a question, so I spoke during. I chose not, knowing that I could respond to a couple of points raised in the speaking time after that. I think Madam Chair.
Sorry to butt in, Chair, but online we can't hear any of this discussion because the microphones aren't on.
I think right at the outset, Madam Chair, you said questions and comments. That's my recollection.
Thank you, Chair Russ. Right, Dave. Let's clear this out once and for all.
Okay, the general process that we follow with the receiving of reports is that if you wanted to speak on the resolution, you would be speaking on whether or not we're receiving the report, not the content of it. We'd normally cover that off in the questions and answers which we have just had.
What do these standing orders say about the right of members to speak to a motion? Do they say anything about that?
We use option B, which is Standing Orders 22.3 of the Local Government Acts. The mover and seconder of a motion cannot move or second an amendment. That doesn't apply here. Any members, regardless of whether they have spoken to the original or substituted motion, may move or second an amendment to it, in which case if you were to move an amendment and you could then speak to it. The mover or seconder of an amendment that is carried can move or second a subsequent amendment, but if it's lost, you cannot. Members can speak to any amendment, and provided they have not spoken to the motion, which you have not at this stage, or moved and seconded an amendment, they can move or second further amendments.
It's nothing to do with that. I'm talking about speaking to the motion.
You can speak to the motion, but the motion is that we receive the report. So you have to speak to whether or not we're receiving the report.
Right, all those in favour?
Hang on. He's just said that I can speak to the motion. Oh, this is just ridiculous.
To be fair, like
It's not to do with that. It's an important point that Rick's raised that needs some further examination, which I wanted to support and add to. He raised it as part of this, you know, as part of his question. And even the Democracy Secretary, I'm not sure your title, David, has said there's a reference to speaking to the motion in there. You just brushed on past it. Well, are you chairing it, Toby?
Oh, if you're allowed to speak for you,
We're speaking on a process here.
Well, we can be here all day, or we can move on.
Or you can let me say which I would have been well finished by now.
Dave, I always value your contributions. However, sometimes
Don't give me a lecture.
I'm not going to give you a lecture. I said at the beginning of the meeting that it's a heavy agenda. We do have a workshop this afternoon as well. Could you comment?
Is everyone going to be here? I don't know. Are you going to have this sort of item on the workshop agenda? If there's another place for it, I'm not opposed to doing that. Russ raised an important point which were in the course of this debate, which I believe needs to be addressed. The fact that the point's been raised at our council as well, this committee is the place to raise it.
Okay, next item we have matters arriving. You can exit as or we can go to the vote if you'd like more discussion on this topic. Okay, I'm happy to wait till the workshop this afternoon. So can we park those thoughts, Councillor McPherson, and we will hear them this afternoon. Right, have we done what we need to do with it? Sorry, Dave.
All we've done so far is moved and seconded. We need to vote though.
Thank you. All right, all those in favour of receiving the report, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. All right, next item on the agenda. Director Mark, can you please introduce it and also make mention of staff that we maybe need introductions for? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, in the first instance, introduce a couple of new people, new faces in the room. You may have already met Trudy Knight. Trudy has been, up until recently, our project manager in our public transport section. She's now our acting PT manager for a period of 6 months. When we come through to the next report that is under Trudy's team, I'll ask her to introduce herself a little bit as well. But welcome, Trudy. Trudy comes with a lot of experience in our area of public transport and project delivery, and in the region of the Waikato Regional Council. So just introducing Trudy. And also Gordon Naidu. Gordon may be familiar to some of you. Gordon is with a Hamilton City Council, previously with South Waikato, now the Unit Director of Transport at Hamilton City. So we can expect to see a reasonable amount of Gordon around the tracks as well. Welcome, Gordon. In respect of the report, I will ask members that the report be taken as read, save for one or two small items, which you'll find from page 21 in your agenda pack, which is the actions arising. The ones that have recommended closed are the ones that are recommended to be closed. You'll notice that the one in respect to the Disability Action Plan from 7th of May has been superseded by a latter one. We're just kind of making a bit of an effort to tidy things up, really. But we know that the preference is for us to make sure we're all very clear, the committee members are all very clear about what remains open and what's been closed off. Also, importantly, from the matters arising from the 17th of September, there were 3 recommendations from the Connections Committee that the Regional Council has since considered. They relate to matters that were to be advanced through the annual plan 2022-23. It was the regionalisation of total mobility. That's action number 9 there, RC 2141. It was decided not to progress the regionalisation of total mobility funding at this time, But for that to be progressed through the Public Transport Business Improvement Review, the Chair may wish to make some comments on that, but there was a clear understanding of the benefits of it. Also that it was quite a complex set of funding arrangements at the moment that would take some time to unpick and research. In respect of community transport, the matter was raised seeking the confirmation that the council would pursue establishing a $200,000 community transport fund that was carried by our council, and that fund will be in place from July 2023. There will be a more substantial report on the activity in community transport under item 11. The others I'll take as they are, but through you, Madam Chair, happy to receive any questions or further comments.
Thank you, Mark. Morris, I see your hand. Thank you. You may make a comment or have a question.
How do I make this work?
Red's go.
Red's go.
Let's go. Okay. Just on the total mobility, although that you're not progressing with making it the whole of Waikato, just some food for thought, I guess, is that, and maybe is that Wellington Council have just upped their subsidy for the scheme for areas that is available. Common theme of a problem for local for total mobility is that the current, well, not with some of the government increase at the moment, but just it's been an ongoing discussion is that the current subsidy of $15 doesn't really get you that far anymore with the cost of an increased cost of petrol and the increase of taxis. So maybe that could be something that could be considered instead.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. The option that was put to our council was to bring consistency to the fare subsidy caps regionally as well, which would have increased the subsidy cap to $50, which is the same that is currently in place in Waikato District. And that is, I think, speaks to what you mentioned, that the coverage of the scheme is one factor. The level of subsidy cap and consistency between those is also important. So I think council really did understand that dynamic, and I think it would be, I'll leave it for the chair to comment, but I think there is definitely an opportunity for the subsidy caps to be looked at when those schemes come around with the individual TAs, when new ones are established, and then potentially to still move to a regionalised model as part of the business improvement review. There was an appetite to do that. There just wasn't quite the appetite to do it through this annual plan process.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Morris. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. No, I was just listening to that. My question was around the total mobility as well. So my understanding is it went to a full WRC council meeting and they just said not right now. So it would be the LTP that would be looking at that essentially, to be clear.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, like any council process, there's always some kind of opportunity for annual plan 2023-24 as well as long-term plan 24.
Okay. And that's it's so will that, okay, no, that's all right. I'll take it offline and we'll work out just what the next steps are to make sure that we do get good progress on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, sorry, Chair Angela, one other question, something that I couldn't see on, I might be wrong, but I couldn't see on the action list was just around the, in terms of the conversation that we had last meeting regarding the removal of the number 8 Frankton route, and the question, I guess we talked about doing some kind of study or work around where it's appropriate to be amalgamating, removing routes, and where it's actually, you know, and where the flex bus has its role, and where actually that isn't as appropriate. I didn't know if I saw that captured.
Through you, Madam Chair, I do recall the conversation, Sarah. I'll review the minutes and recordings from the last meeting and we'll pick that up, make sure we haven't missed it accidentally. Thanks for raising it.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Cheers.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, just to pick up on a little bit of the conversation so far. Yeah, through our annual plan, we have decided to establish the $200,000 community transport fund, and that was a real win for us this year. And just in light of what we're doing around the public transport business improvement review, and where that might go following discussion today, we're really keen to definitely look at the total region in regards to total mobility, and we believe that that is the best opportunity to do that. Yeah, just to get that consistency, as Mark has said, across the region. So it definitely hasn't fallen off the radar. Yeah, you just got to pick often what you put forward and yeah, what you keep in your sights for next time. So yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so we've got a few things here that we're closing off. We will take them as one lot. So we will need a mover and a seconder to receive the report and agree that those matters are now closed. Oh, sorry, Mayor Toby.
So move.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Thompson, would you like to second? Excellent, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Against?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. All right, on to the next one. Network planning update. Is it you?
Good morning, Madam Chair
Thank you. Take
and
it
committee
away.
members. Oh, is this a bit loud?
No, it's good.
This is our regular network planning update, a bit of a tour de force of the comings and goings of bus services across the region. This report obviously emphasis on the regional services rather than Hamilton. However, as ever, there's lots going on in public transport space, not just across the region, but also Hamilton. And I think it would be remiss of me not to speak about some of the important things that are going on in Hamilton as well. Reduced driver availability continues to be a significant concern for our bus operations in Hamilton, and we're currently short of about 20% of drivers to operate our full timetables. And this, of course, is a significant barrier to us launching new service improvements as well. The Meteor, for instance, and some improvements to the Comet are now having to be pushed out until later in the year, pending GoBus being able to recruit enough drivers to deliver those services. But what we are looking at the moment is the opportunity to launch the Meteor on an interim service at a half-hourly frequency instead of a 15-minute frequency. Now, that does mean, of course, that it will not initially be that high-frequency route that we want it to be. It will provide a much better connectivity between the east and west of the city. It will provide connectivity to Rotorcarry Hub and to Huia, and also the base as well. So we think small steps to getting back towards normal services is a good thing, but yeah, recognise the immediacy of some of the challenges that we're facing at the moment. So I'd also like to provide an update on some of the regional issues that are pertinent to this meeting. So you'll remember 6 months ago there was a discussion around the Cambridge to Hamilton bus services and infrastructure to support those committed bus service improvements. So we have now got ACOM underway with a study looking at some of those key infrastructure constraints on the Cambridge to Hamilton route. We've had some good engagement with Hamilton City Council, the university and Waikatahi, and we're looking to hopefully get some recommendations from that study towards the end of May. And the things that they will be looking at are things like bus priority and along the whole route, but of course mainly towards the Hamilton end of things where things tend to be more congested. Park and ride, of course, and also passenger waiting and interchange facilities as well. And hopefully that will inform some of the priorities for infrastructure for the various parties concerned going forward. Also, of course, had good engagement with Waipā DC colleagues about the routes within Cambridge and what outcomes they wish to get from the study as well. So Thames Connector, that contract expires in August. Some of you may be aware that Thames Coromandel District Council, as funders of the Thames Connector service through the Thames Community Board, undertook a survey over the Christmas period to gauge the level of support for various service improvement activities, but also to get feedback on the existing service. I think it's fair to say that there was a resoundingly positive response, and we were quite heartened by that response from Thames community residents. Currently, funding for that service is only until the end of the current LTP period, and that is a NZTA funding constraint. We would like to get that service moved into the continuous programme as soon as possible, but the next 2 years will be a good push for us to get that into the continuous programme. Taupo and Takura services. So the tender for those services has gone out. I won't repeat what's in the report for brevity, but those tenders are currently being evaluated and looking to operationalise those, I believe, later this year. The motion is to take the report as read, but happy to take any questions. I'm sure there will be.
Thank you, Andy, for that. We've got Councillor Tegg online, was in first, so we'll hear from him about what's happening up his way. Thanks, Dennis.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mark. Andrew. Just a couple of questions first. What term will the new tender be for? Thanks.
So the new contract will need to align with Waikatahi funding commitments. So it will be a relatively short-term contract of around 18, 24 months, but with options to extend.
Right, thanks. Will the B card be introduced from the beginning of that contract?
There are no plans to introduce the B card onto that vehicle at the moment, but we can certainly take that one away. We typically, on services where there's quite a low fare revenue, the B card ticketing machines are quite expensive to lease and operate. So it's usually the case where we've got those services don't recoup a lot of fare revenue. That actually costs us more to put the ticketing machine in than we actually recoup in fare revenue. But yeah, we can look at that again.
Yeah, I'd like that. Thanks. And so, given it's a smaller contract, some of this may not apply. But one of the issues with longer contracts has been a lack of flexibility. For example, whether you would require wheelchair access, whether if we moved on demand, that could be, incorporated into the contract. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, whether there's enough flexibility in these contracts to transition to an electric vehicle, which in this space for a van of this size they're already starting to come on the market. So I suppose a concern around this is, do we have enough flexibility to, in these tender contracts, to incorporate those sort of changes?
Yeah, so really difficult to get that kind of level of investment with a short-term contract. As you're probably aware, the standard PTOM contract is 9 years, which allow operators to get a good guaranteed use of that vehicle throughout the contract term. With it being a short-term contract, I think the best option would be to review at the end of the initial short term and go through the procurement process for an electric vehicle at the end of that short-term contract, if the funding was available.
Sure. And the other two issues of wheelchair and on demand, would they be put off too?
So Ministry of Transport is undertaking a review of public transport operating model at the moment. You might be aware that on-demand services aren't technically classified as a scheduled bus service under the Land Transport Management Act currently. So we're hoping that will make it a lot easier for us to transition between those types of services for the likes of Thames. But certainly the question was asked of Thames community, would on demand be something that we should look at? And 70% came back and said yes. So we see that as a pretty good indicator that there's a good deal of community interest behind pursuing that kind of model. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that was encouraging. So I suppose just to finish off here, I suppose the concern is there's enough flexibility built into these contracts to allow these sort of changes. And I take your point for a short-term contract. That may not be appropriate, but ongoing. I think one of the flaws, if you like, in some of our contracts in the past has been they haven't provided sufficient flexibility for really rapid changes in technology and so on. So just a note on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Teague. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. So, Andy, I was just interested in some of the comments around the Hamilton-Cambridge route and opportunities for electrification. I'm recognising we have a full agenda today. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to delve more deeply into the issues around electrification. So that's the first one of my questions. And just more generally, I ask this every time, but and at the risk of being super annoying, have we heard anything further around those grants that for electrification from central government?
Thank you for the question. So yes, I mean electrification is an issue that's pertinent to all councils across the country at the moment. It's not something that's unique to the Waikato, and there's a lot of debate and strategizing around how is the best way to transition to electric vehicles. When a lot of these contracts were let before electric buses were really on the agenda, and trying to negotiate electric buses into the fleets has got some challenges associated with it, but also there is some nervousness from our funding partners, Waikatahi, about the redundancy of some diesel buses that are likely to get pushed out because we moved to an electric fleet instead of a diesel fleet. So the concern being that they'd be a stranded asset essentially. But yes, I think there's a lot to unpick there, and yeah, happy to have a workshop on that.
Chair Angela, I'm not sure if something was already planned in this regard, but if not, is that possible to have that opportunity for more in-depth discussion quite soon.
Yes, I'll let Mark answer that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the committee's direction in respect of the PT plan, with a view to climate emission reduction being the centrepiece rather than the sideshow for the PT plan, this afternoon's workshop will actually have quite a considerable discussion about the transition to net zero and a zero emission fleet. And in that, there'll be plenty of opportunity to unpick some of the challenges and opportunities that exist around that, including the timing of contract renewals, the role of and other aspects of it. I would note in the report, one thing that we have struck up a conversation with Waipa District Council, and thank you, Councillor Stallworth, for facilitating that in terms of the need for us to quickly advance conversations about the identification of land that might be suitable for the use for charging infrastructure for an electrified fleet. So this is one thing that one of many elements that are effectively new to our PT operating model that we're having to step through. But there'll be a big opportunity for a more fulsome conversation this afternoon.
Thank you, Mark. And sorry, I was looking for the workshop pre-reading stuff, but I'm not sure if I was just missing it. Has that been provided already?
The workshop is on the RPTP development. Vincent will send it through. So Vincent will send through the presentation prior to the workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, and there was still no news in regard to the government's contribution towards this.
That is my understanding. Yes, there's no news.
Yeah.
The last news we had, that money had been reappropriated into another fund.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for your indulgence, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Deputy Mayor Liz.
Thank you for that. Hey, look, just wanted a couple of comments on the report. So I guess firstly, the increased services and timetabling has been really, really well received by Waipa residents. I think we'll see a great uptake, and especially now with where we've got discounts with fuel prices and things like that. I'd really like to think that the next 3 months we'll see an even greater increase of those services. In terms of the new report and the scoping, great to see the University of Waikato in there. I think that offers enormous opportunities for some of our residents, and the park and ride will also, hopefully have some good solutions going forward for people working in either, the city or in some of our larger towns. But look, particularly I'm really impressed with the innovativeness. Mark, thank you. Looking at the tender process and perhaps offering some changes or flexibility around some of the infrastructure. I think, when you identify something early on, having that flexibility now to be able to make some tweaks or some changes means that we just might have a really better outcome for our residents, especially if the tender process was looking a little bit thin. So yeah, really appreciate the opportunity. I think it's probably really fair to say that Waipa residents have some real aspirations on with public transport. Our larger towns are closely associated with the city, but we've also got a real growing need and concern around moving our residents around our own towns. So within Cambridge and Te Awamutu in particular. So we are, I guess, and I continue to put pressure on Mark around, perhaps looking at options to be able to move residents, into our own CBDs from the outlining residential areas. So yeah, we'll keep the pressure on, I think, and perhaps look to create some solutions going forward.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, and I'm really excited by the potential there, especially in light of the whole region. Yeah, getting some electric vehicles into the PT fleet, yeah, is a really exciting prospect. So yeah, thank you for your work on that as well. I just had a couple of questions, Andy. You mentioned the Meteor perhaps starting at a half an hour interval. Are you wanting some guidance on that today?
Not. I mean, we're having to manage things to provide the best service level that we can with the number of drivers that are available. So it's very much a question of as and when. If the committee would like to provide some feedback on that proposal, I'd be more than happy to receive it.
Thank you. I just had a follow-up question. If we do choose to start at half an hour, at what point would the consolidation of those other routes take place?
So the issue that we've got at the moment is that basically every change on every bus route that we're both proposing and was previously operable requires more drivers than we've got at the moment. So if the question is specifically in relation to the Frankton and the Silverdale routes, yeah, we would have to do those at the same time, but we would imagine keeping the other route timetables the same for the time being under the emergency timetables.
Okay, thank you. And how much lead-in time would you need once guidance has been given?
About 3 months.
Okay. And just generally, within our contracts, if our service provider is unable to meet what we would like them to meet, are there any penalties that are imposed?
I will defer that question to my colleague, Trudy. So I need to
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess in terms of contractual penalties, there isn't anything associated.
Can we get the people to speak into the
Just
mic? No, lift it up.
Lift it up. Is that better? Yes, sorry. In terms of any penalties associated with non-delivery, I don't believe there is anything within the contract attached to that type of scenario, but we do have obviously the mechanism for variation of contracts. So I guess the possibility, if it were to arise that there was capacity elsewhere, there could be the opportunity to vary out some of that service and, you know, go elsewhere. But, you know, there's tendering and other things associated with that. For example, if we were to look at, say, the Meteor as an example.
Okay. Thank you. I might follow up further offline around that one. Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, I didn't hear a word, sorry, what was said before, but I did, other than one Meteor in it, the last speaker, but I'm looking at that question about whether the Meteor should start half-hourly intervals. I am not sure that Hamilton City Council would agree with that. It hasn't been discussed with us. We've had no opportunity to have a discussion around our table about that, but we've had multiple discussions and a lot of angst about providing infrastructure for the extra infrastructure for the Comet and Meteor routes. So I would say that before you go down that road, we need to have a discussion at our council. Personally speaking, and I am only speaking personally because we haven't had the opportunity to discuss it, I would be opposed to starting it half-hourly because the principle of these routes which we've been espousing to our council and our public, as you know, and I know you support this in principle as well, so it's not a personal attack or anything, is that it is more direct and more frequent than anything else, and half hourly isn't more frequent. I totally appreciate why you're in that situation, but I would think it'd be very hard for us to promote that as a service, as a new type of service, if it's only same old frequency. So, but again, I'd like our council to have a look at that, because we were initially the ones that pushed quite hard for the Meteor route. We'd still do in principle, but to start a halfway version maybe sets us up for failure, if not some severe perceptual problems. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. I would personally say, but even more so, our council needs to have that discussion, I think.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I think at the moment the team is still effectively rebuilding the change program on the basis of the driver shortage issue that we've had at the moment. I think there's a real a knowledge that, and you know, it's a strange place to find an opportunity, but with the revised timetables as they are now, there's an opportunity to rebuild to previous service levels, but not necessarily configured in exactly the same way as they were before we implemented the reduced timetables, in order to provide headroom for things like, you know, the improvement program. Notwithstanding that, we still end up in a situation of needing to manage with the number of drivers that we've got. So I think what the team will do is that work, as that work progresses, we'll be able to, you know, make sure that we package up what that change program is looking like, and make sure it's well socialised and there's an opportunity for feedback before it's locked and loaded. Absolutely. They're still, Andy and the team are still working through exactly the detail of how we make ends meet with respect to achieving the objectives and progressing in the direction that we want to with respect to the change program and the strategy for the urban services, while working within what we understand our driver availability is like to look like.
Yeah, the driver availability is another question, and one would have to question the wage levels that they're offering as to how much that has to do with the driver unavailability. But that question aside, this is, you know, the provision of PT in the Hamilton City is very important, not just to your program, but to our overall transport network here in the city. And this mostly affects Hamilton. So I think there needs to be a council discussion there about what the best way forward in the circumstances is. You know, there's no blame attached that we're in these circumstances. You didn't invent COVID, you didn't cause the driver shortage, but now we're in that. What's the best way forward out of it? And I'm not sure that starting a fast, frequent service that isn't frequent is the best way out of it. It might be better to, if you've got only a little bit of extra resource, put it into the Comet going every 10 minutes, because that's, you know, that's just an example. You know, I don't know whether that's the best, but, you know, it occurs to me that's an option. Because if we can't do that, we can't do the Meteor properly, we can't move forward on the return of rocket at all. But maybe we need to just thrash that out between our two councils.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So I guess the city focused version of this committee is a joint committee, 50-50, chair, co-chair, or deputy chair, and it's probably a good collection of people, whether it be at a meeting or a workshop level, to be able to you know, push around a few of those ideas. So we'll take that away as a team and think about exactly what the process might look like.
I mean, I'm pretty sure our council would support a special meeting, even, you know, earlier than normal, to discuss that sort of question, given the situation we're in. We were a little surprised to see so many Hamilton things on the agenda today, because we thought this was more region-wide. So we weren't prepared coming out of our annual plan to have any sort of decision-making or directional setting stuff on Hamilton here at this one.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Yeah, I appreciate that you have had a bit of a marathon effort with your annual plan recently. Yeah, I suppose there there are a few Hamilton things here, just given that's just how things have worked out. And well, I won't say unfortunately, but yeah, just acknowledging that Hamilton, and there's so many links to Hamilton within PT as well. So yeah, I think it's a good idea that we come back to this at another time where it's more specifically focused WRC, HCC. I do know we've got 2 speakers, Councillor O'Leary and Councillor Thompson. Given that we will come back to this at a more specific time, do you have anything further to add now? Councillor O'Leary, you can go first.
Yeah, no, I was just going to support Councillor McPherson on that. Our annual plan funding was on a knife edge for the meteor and comet route infrastructure, so I wouldn't want to put anything at risk, but appreciate, Madam Chair, if you will make sure that we have further discussion on this. Yeah, thank you.
Certainly. Councillor Thompson?
Thank you. Yes, support the discussion that's just occurred around making sure that we get the service right first time. But also just some more information, doesn't have to be right now, but around I guess the funding that was put aside to increase services and where that is going to go if we can't get them off the ground now, and if there are options to do other things with that might still help to achieve some of the outcomes we're looking for around public transport in the meantime, or if it's better to defer that, or what suggestions and options there are there.
Yeah, let's pick that up at a further conversation as well. You raised some really good points. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. We are going to receive the report. I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Liz. All those in favour of receiving the report, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is an PTP update. Now we are going to receive the report, and I'm happy to move that we receive the report. Do I have a seconder, which will then be followed by comments and questions? Just to thank you, Deputy Mayor Liz. All right, now we're open for comments, questions, if there are any. Vincent, would you like to update us, or would you like to take the report as read? Okay, so just to clarify, oh, there we go. Thank you, Nigel.
Cool. So I guess since the last meeting, the staff have been working on updating the regional public transport plan, and the report provides some information around the program and timeline for the review. Obviously, we're on a very tight time frame, so we will be utilising the upcoming RCC meetings and workshop to go through all the strategic topic which was agreed at the last meeting. And we also got a workshop planned this afternoon, and the topics we'll be focusing on are the pathway for achieving the zero emissions for PT, as well as looking at the opportunity for significant mode shift as part of delivering the frequent and rapid public transport networks. So for the later part of the workshop, we'll also be inviting the MSP project team to give us an update around latest thinking for the rapid public transport network.
Thank you. Yeah, and I really appreciated in the report how you've set out what the future workshop topics will be. Fantastic. I just had a quick process question around public hearings and deliberations in August. Do we have a placeholder in diaries for that yet, or is that date not yet been determined?
That hasn't been confirmed, but I'm working through with our internal democracy team to get that confirmed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And relevant other council democracy teams, or how does that work?
So, yeah, they'll be coordinating with other democracy teams to get a date confirmed.
Thank you, Vincent. As there are no further questions or comments, all those in favour of receiving the report, please say aye. Aye, against? Carried. Thank you, Vincent, for your time. All right. Item 10, the PT Business Improvement Review. All right, now we come to the meat in the agenda. I'll just have a little few comments to make at the start, and then I'll hand over to Mark. When I came into council this term, my goal was to bring greater awareness of PT outside of Hamilton. And to some extent that's happened through the Regional Connections Committee, and then that expanding to have a bit more of a regional focus as well. Alongside highlighting what community transport does as well, and the tireless work that many volunteers do in every community within the region. Recently, we've established the Regional Community Transport Grant Fund, alongside Trust Waikato, who helped us out with some funding there as well. We also have a full-time staff member to facilitate this. So, looking at that larger urban, smaller urban, and then rural communities across our region, community transport goes a long way to help people in every area of our region. And also total mobility has been really expanded this triennium as well. Thank you to all those councils who have taken up the challenge that Morris has been so passionate about, and really taken that on board, and we've seen some really good implementation of that across the region. And I really hope that that will gain traction and just get full coverage across the region moving forward. Now, the review was really birthed by a visit that Chair Russ, myself and key staff took to Auckland Transport early in the triennium, just before COVID hit. And we met with the management team up there, and we're really inspired by what they were achieving in the public transport space. Now, I acknowledge that we're not Auckland, nor do we really aspire to be, but we can make a lot of learnings from what they have done up there. Shortly after that visit, we commissioned the PT Improvement Review, and our goal was, really just to put out some feelers, put out an idea, and listen to feedback. I acknowledge that, our region really is diverse, and it won't be a one size fits all. But one of the, one of the barriers or opportunities, whatever way you look at it, our region is so diverse, and I really wanted to empower all our areas of our region to retain their people, and even to attract people through providing those transport connections for employment, education, health, and for social reasons. So I'm really excited with reading through all the feedback that different TAs have given us from around the region, and there's some really excellent ideas, and it's great to have that local voice and that local input. And whatever happens moving forward, where we land on this, I think it's really important that we retain that local voice, because you all know your communities best. We're just really keen to see public transport in the broader sense, buses, trains, community transport, total mobility, just see it maximised to the best that can, whatever that might look like in all communities across the Waikato. So I'll hand it over to Mark, and he will lead us through the discussion. Actually, should we have a mover and a seconder, and then we will have the discussion as well. I'm happy to move this one.
I'm happy to second Dennis here.
Thank you, Councillor Tegg. And over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll go a little bit back and then bring us up to speed through to the recommended actions. As Councillor, as the Chair talked through, there were a number of drivers for this work. A need to reduce transport emissions, to connect communities and provide us access to essential services and general civic engagement. Growth pressures to manage, making the most efficient use of transport corridors and urban land, and a view that public transport has a critical role to play in these things. At the same time, there was considerable concern that the uniquely complex arrangements we have in the Waikato for planning and funding public transport, out of nobody's fault, and a perception that these arrangements are making it more difficult to progress at the rate and scale needed than they could. So an independent review was commissioned, and that came up with 3 types of actions, which I've been through with you before. Practical actions, a number of which are already underway or set out in our plans and strategies, things like in our urban areas, moving towards frequent core routes, consolidating coverage and the use of demand responsive electronic ticketing, real-time signage, these types of things. New tools that includes this question of whether or not the regional council should on some more funding responsibilities, whether or not the regional council should look to develop new tools that may enable it to fund or attract funding for public transport from wider third parties. And then the big one, which is around institutional arrangements. So the configuration of who is responsible for doing what in respect of provision of public transport and its associated infrastructure. The regional council went out and sought some feedback on the review and its recommendations from a range of stakeholders, big focus on territorial authorities, especially given those questions about funding and the interaction of responsibilities with the road controlling authority functions. Thank you to many of you who facilitated access to your councillors and the meetings that were held. That feedback was just as valuable as the written feedback that you'll see attached to the report here. That feedback, we really sought feedback on the sentiment on changes in public transport funding model, whether or not the regional council should rate for infrastructure. So what types, how might that be administered? And the institutional arrangement components, ranging from maintaining the status quo through to the all singing, all dancing regional transport authority at the very far other end of the spectrum. In general terms, the feedback was very supportive of changes or making changes to the current arrangements and the need to do more in public transport. The benefits of higher degrees of integration between road controlling authority and public transport service provision functions was most obvious in Hamilton, Waipa and Waikato district, and it was of no surprise really that those councils were most keen to engage more fully in that conversation about what could we do differently. In the wider region, there was also agreement that the funding model can be improved, I think general understanding that it's overly complicated, and also a strong desire to be more engaged in public transport and engaged in public transport in its broader sense, as the Chair just talked about. There were also, however, some underlying questions about whether the current model engages rural communities and territorial authorities to the extent that they should be in the design and delivery of public transport services. And from this, a real desire to be engaged, while understanding the need for change, really keen to be engaged thoroughly in the development of those future funding and governance models, and more active, proactive service planning. So bringing the recommendations of the Business Improvement Review together with the feedback received largely from territorial authorities, although I note that there was some feedback from the disability action sector and others. The 5 recommendations were, I've put 5 actions forward which would form the basis of a strategy to be taken to Waikato Regional Council towards the end of April. Those 5 actions are really, the first one is the first step towards, in effect, a sub-regional public transport entity. It's the first step. Working with those long-standing future-proof partners, Waipa, Waikato and Hamilton City, Hopefully Matamata Piako would be able to participate in those discussions as they do in other future-proof matters to the extent it affects them. Taking those first steps towards a sub-regional approach to governing, planning, funding and delivering an aligned program of public transport services. There was a significant effort, and I appreciate the effort that's gone in particular from Hamilton City, the feedback provided, and also the openness from all of the Waipa, Hamilton City and Waikato district to effectively going on a bit of a journey of discovery together. A consistent regional funding model is what Action 2 is referring to, the start of. Co-designing a fit-for-purpose rating model with all willing territorial authorities. That speaks to, I guess, the desire or the understanding across the region that the current model could definitely be improved, but in equal measure, a desire to be involved in designing that solution together. We know in particular in rural communities, some of the questions about who pays and who benefits are really relevant conversations that territorial authorities are very keen to be a part of, even where they do support a transfer to a regional rating model. Taupo District Council is a great example of that. Enhanced regional engagement. This is really recognising that, in particular outside of the future-proof partnership, there is a strong desire to do more in public transport and to be more engaged in the design and delivery of public transport services. We have some challenges with our current funding and resourcing model, which limits our ability to get out there and be as proactive as we might like. So this recommendation is really one that comes back to the Regional Council in terms of ensuring that we're set up to be able to do that proactive planning. And lastly, Action 4 is around that proactive planning. So the feedback received is that, yes, it was about we want to understand what the future public transport services may look like, particularly in rural and regional areas, ahead of making decisions about who should be responsible for them. That was some feedback from Matamata Piako District Council in particular, and also a real desire to find a way to address the shortfall in capacity and capability that everybody is struggling with in the competition for talent at the moment in respect of integrated transport and land use planning, where we're understanding and are putting quite a lot of effort across our the future-proof partnership in the wider region. It is just as important, actually, the capacity and capability to do as much as territorial authorities would like to is stretched, we would expect. And aligned expectations. This is something that we feel is reasonably readily dealt with in terms of key performance indicators and infrastructure expectations. So these aren't detailed design guidelines for infrastructure by any stretch of the imagination, but it is just being clear about what the infrastructure expectations are for different kinds of service levels for public transport to again promote that consistency across the region. And these will be matters, in particular the latter, that has been picked up through the regional PT plan review. So those are the 5 key actions that come, if endorsed by this committee, that endorsement will flow through alongside a strategy to our regional council later in April, with the committee's blessing, I hope, and otherwise with your feedback and adjustments as might be fitting. Back over to you, Madam Chair. Just one point of clarity to make. I expect this was something that came up in discussion with territorial authorities, a bit of a desire for some clarity about infrastructure. So some of the feedback we saw was, should the regional council get involved in raising funds for infrastructure, and if it were to do so, should it be all infrastructure, strategic infrastructure, on-road, off-road, and then how does it become an investor in that? So just to be clear about the dynamic that we're talking about here, there are some forms of infrastructure that the regional council is, in my view, going to need to start investing in directly or indirectly. We talked a little bit about the depot land for electric vehicle or future electric vehicle charging. That's one example. Another one would be park and road facilities. Now, these are potentially off-road infrastructure, so they don't necessarily interfere at all with the road controlling authority functions of territorial authorities. They could, while some territorial authorities have existing assets that might be very well placed to meet some of those needs, which is wonderful where they do, it's not always the case, and it can stand aside from the road controlling authority functions as distinct for on-road infrastructure, which we'll be talking about the bus lanes, the bus stops, all of these kinds of things that are the responsibility of territorial authorities. So back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mark, for clarifying and yeah, really giving us a really fulsome introduction to the journey so far. Yeah, I'm really keen to open up for comments and questions as well. Just really interested in your views from your councils that you've gleaned through this consultative process. Yeah, fantastic. Knowing that a few people will want to comment, if we could keep our comments to one per person, that would really just help us to move through in a timely way. That would be fantastic. Thank you. So, Councillor Thompson, you can start us off. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Chair Angela, and thanks, Mark. I wanted to start with a question. It was just to get some clarity around Action 1. So, because there is some urgency around this, just in terms of Action 1, what do you think there will be the willingness to move more quickly among the future-proof partners? And would this potentially look at what HCC submitted on, which was more of a co-governance board model, which would then look at both your potentially both your infrastructure and services in terms of funding?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, that's exactly the type of conversation that this would provide a platform for. And there was my sense from the written feedback, but also from meeting with those councils, understanding that Waikato District didn't submit written feedback. I did meet with that council. They also had a high degree of appetite to engage in precisely that conversation as well. And given that we're talking in kind of metro spatial terms with respect to the urban area, Waikato District also looking further north in terms of integration with Auckland, that's exactly the kind of conversation that I'd expect happening through Action 1.
Okay, and that will include the mass transit work that's happening right now through Future-Proof and the metro spatial work?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, we're staying close to the Metro Spatial Plan Transport Program. One of the components of that is the management case. How would, once a program is agreed, how would it actually be implemented? I would see Action 1, and we can absolutely take that feedback on as something to be more clear about as this continues its journey. But there is a real opportunity for whatever the agreed model is between the 4 local government authorities that would be most closely engaged in Action 1, so for that to be the vehicle to implement those actions that require that real joined up planning and investment.
Thank you. And okay, 2 last questions and I'm done. It was just Waka Kotahi. I'm interested in where they're sitting with all of this and how ready they are to evolve and move with us. And secondly, what does in terms of working with partners, what do you expect that to look like, and what do you expect a time frame to potentially look like?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Firstly, with respect to Waka Kotahi have been provided with a copy of the review and the opportunity to provide feedback. They haven't at this stage, in saying that the majority of actions, including Action 1, depending on the degree, the extent to which we may take it, would be totally up for the territorial authorities and the regional council together to chart that path. It really would come to the matter of the extent to which any other different kinds of funding arrangements from the Transport Agency might be relied on to fund a future program. And again, Waka Kotahi are part of the Future Proof Partnership, a part of the Metro Spatial Plan Transport Program. So there is there's a really good opportunity for them to make their views clearly known around that at that stage. And sorry, the second question, Councillor Thompson, timing. That's a great question. We're fast approaching the end of the current electoral cycle or the current triennium. I would like to be able to commence some of these conversations this side of the new triennium, although I'm conscious that there's quite a lot of things on agendas and the likes. But I think the intention would be, after the Regional Council has endorsed the strategy or actions associated with that, we would move quite quickly to those first discussions with that partnership, because will first off be some quite fundamental questions and decisions need to be made about how that process is overseen. And I would desperately at least like to have that component locked and loaded ahead of the close of this triennium.
Okay, thank you very much. That's really helpful. And I guess a comment would be that looking at Action 1, I think that there's an opportunity not only to be looking at what we're doing as TAs, but also in parallel to be looking at how we secure a better funding arrangement with Waka Kotahi and central government. And if you look at ATAP or Let's Get Willie Moving, and there's been issues with those, but essentially looking at a more sustainable funding model, which might be predicated on a bulk funding model or a 10-year funding agreement or whatever it might be. And so I guess I would be very keen to understand how we can start to have that conversation at the same time, so that we can actually be in a good place to implement some of this stuff and not playing the NLTP game. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I support the points that Sarah's raised. We certainly support the principle behind the thrust here. We would have some great concerns about the governance if it wasn't co-governance, though. I would hazard a guess that our council would not support something that was a Waikato Regional Council entity that we were handing over things to, like the responsibility for infrastructure, for instance, or any other decisions in this area. It would have to be a co-governance model for us to support it. So I would say it's certainly, while we haven't said it in that way in our submission, we've certainly put the case for co-governance. So I think that's important that Waikato Regional Council understands that approach that we're making as well. This public transport in the region has always needed to be a joint effort from all parties, and that includes Waka Kotahi as well. It doesn't work if one party, there's even a perception that one party is telling others how it's going to be. The second point in relation to the funding model, we've always supported the principle of the funding model that applies to Hamilton, and we've for many years submitted that it should apply to everyone. As far as Waikato Regional PT goes, there's lots of advantages, not the least of which is it takes it off the Territorial Authorities rates bill. And I would say that to every council outside even the future-proof area. This has got a big perceptual advantage for you, provided you can still have some input into how it's managed and delivered. It also hasn't escaped Hamilton City Council's attention, though it has escaped mostly Hamilton residents' attention, is that half the subsidy of every bus service that has a destination of Hamilton from outlying areas is actually funded by Hamilton residents. I think that's escaped at times the attention of some of the outlying councils. that there's a big contribution from Hamilton, an equal contribution to theirs, in fact, for that. And there's logical reasons why that's the case. But while we understand there might need to be a transition to a new thing, especially in some of the areas where there's maybe it's PT is a newer thing, or South Waikato is one that occurs to me. We wouldn't want to see Hamilton residents continuing to contribute when there's sort of to two different models of your funding models. We think it's really messy what happens now, and would like to see that all consolidated, but understand there needs to perhaps be a transition towards that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Morris.
Yeah, so I was just wanting to highlight the submission on page 106 from the Disabled Persons Assembly, which I think it really highlights a opportunity with this to improve on data collection for disabled people. In the words of Jerry Pomeroy, I guess, where she's spoken for decades about data isn't always the most transparent, because we only count the people who are present, I guess, and we don't get an accurate answer for the why some people aren't present in our communities. And recommendation number 4 on the submission, I think, highlights it very well, is that we need to be transparent in the way that we collect data or do research within our region. And that goes so we don't fall in the trap of just looking at the data pulled from the accessibility concession and total mobility. We need to engage with the community directly, and also the agencies that are involved with the disabled people here locally as well, to see where we can pull additional funding that could be spent for accessibility. Yeah.
Good points, Morris. Thank you.
Very good submission, I thought.
Right. Mayor Toby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It'd be nice to get this work ticked off before the new lot of councillors and mayors come into the region, but the more that you can do now before the RSSs come into play, which is hot topic on not enough lips, because it's all battered on 3 waters, but the regional spatial strategies will take over all of this type of activity. It won't just be based on metro and future-proof, and we'll cover that whole region. And if you look on the local voice work, it's making sure that those people sitting at the table, and so it doesn't change. So not designing a regional spatial strategy and then a GPS or an MPS changing as the government changes, so that they're set in place, so that the right infrastructure and public transport will be a huge part of that going forward. Make sure that for the life of those plans, funding is set aside for the amount of funding that is required. You at least know to carry on with that work program. The more you have, that'll get chucked into a regional spatial strategy better.
Good points. Thank you. Councillor Tegg.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think Toby makes a really good point there. You know, that there's some really big changes coming down the pipeline, which concentrate on a regional perspective, and that's one of the questions I suppose I have for Mark. Is sort of Action 2 talks about quote unquote willing territorial authorities, and whether there's a tension in there between that and, for example, Action 5, where we have to set performance indicators, etc. And so if not everyone's on board with those indicators, and then there's the issue around sort of cross-boundary issues as well, we really need, I think, everyone at the table. And so going forward, what happens to the unwilling ones, I suppose, is really the question, and what's going to be our response to that. So that's my first question to Mark. Thanks.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. It's I was really encouraged by the feedback received, and that there was almost across the board understanding that there was a need to do things differently. And in a way, I was speaking informally with somebody and saying, gosh, it would actually be easier if you had a few people that were really anti and a couple that were really pro. But what it does do is it really shines a light that there is an opportunity here to bring people together on a journey through this process. To the extent that it's possible, I would encourage this committee and my council to capitalise on that opportunity, which is why Action 3 in relation to opportunities to enhance engagement in public transport with outside of the urban area, which those other councils feel is a focus and that they miss out. And also in respect of Action 2 with regards to the rating model, look, I think the greatest opportunity there is to provide an environment where people feel comfortable to participate. Unless there is wholesale legislative reform, the regional council is, as Councillor McPherson said, always going to have to work hand in hand with its territorial authorities to make sure that services and infrastructure are able to be delivered in a really integrated way and form the kind of transport system that the region needs. And I think the best way to do that is to do the best to bring councils along. The crux of your question, Councillor Tegg, was, so what happens if you end up with some in, some not in? I actually think that, in my view, there are areas where that would significantly diminish the benefit. That would be particularly within the future-proof partnership, in particular Hamilton, Waipa and Waikato, and the Waikato Regional Council. In the wider region, however, I think the approach I would recommend is to work where there are willing partners and demonstrate that the model is, in fact, the best option for communities, whatever that endpoint is. Because what we're talking about here is not prejudging what that endpoint is in respect to the funding model or the enhanced engagement with territorial authorities, but it is to work through that with them. And through that process, some may want to stay on the journey and others might want to jump off at some point. But I think the end result is trying to do the best to have the best outcome and implement that with those who are willing. And there may come a point where everybody's in the room, I would like to think, or that it's simply the benefits when looked at it are overwhelmingly positive.
Yes, thanks, Mark. I suppose just to comment on that, and then I'll follow up with another question. I mean, if you look at the responses from Thames, Coromandel and Hauraki, which are the areas where, proposals are most advanced, they've actually been at least supportive in principle of this direction and even the rating model. So that gives some encouragement, I think, and even an organisation like the Thames Business Association has sort of chipped in there as well. So my second question was around the issue that Mark rose relating to infrastructure, and so to Mark, do you see the possibility of a sort of a hybrid system around infrastructure, where those really big issues like EV charging and park and ride assumed by the regional council and the sort of smaller ones around sort of bus stops and that sort of thing are retained by the local authority?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, that's absolutely a possibility. In fact, that particular configuration that you just mentioned there steers the model clear of having to deal with changes in responsibilities in respect of road controlling authorities. So you're absolutely right. That is the type of model that could exist, and I would say that type of infrastructure is also the type of infrastructure that has the greatest regional benefit, for the whole of network, rather than particular services that may be contained within a district or localities. So, in short, yes, Councillor Tegg.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tegg. And Deputy Mayor Liz.
you. Hey, look, I guess we've seen on page 111 our support from Waipa, and thank you, Mark, for addressing our council. So look, our concerns are kind of outlined there, and certainly in principle we're supportive, but we want to make sure we keep that degree of localism. We want to make sure that geographically, where there's equitable, across the region. So in general, very supportive of the approach. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Brodie.
Just trying to bring all my systems to life. Yeah, thank you. Yes, for Waitomo, I guess our submission was probably not terribly supportive in the view of other TAs in the region. We don't have a public transport service as such, but we looked from the point of view that we could see that the main players in the game, being the future-proof, are working very hard to establish a system that is going to be efficient, scalable, and financially viable. And we felt that there's probably still a fair way to go for those groups to achieve that target. And hopefully by the time that's achieved, our situation will have been changed quite dramatically in Waitomo in terms of 3 waters taken off us, God only knows what else. And we may be in a position to start focusing on seeing what options are available from a well set up, well operated public transport system for the Waikato region. And I would expect that what was in place then would be easily plugged into or extendable. So that was essentially the situation that Waitomo found themselves in. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your contributions, Councillor Brodie. Was there anyone else who wished to comment? I'm really encouraged by the discussion today, and just really want to reiterate that we are keen to keep the conversation open, and that involves listening as well as talking. So really keen to see where this heads in a timely way, Director Mark. So thank you for your work on this, and let's look at the resolution before us. All right, so we've got a mover, we've got a seconder, and we're just going to take it as one big lot. So all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Right. I wonder if we take a quick comfort stop, as some would say, and reconvene at 11:45 for the final stretch before lunch and a workshop. So we'll be back at 11:45. See you then. Thank you.